All right, so good afternoon, everybody, and good evening to our colleagues in Israel. Um, my name is Mark Rader, and I'm here at the University of Cincinnati in the History Department, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this special workshop with Dr. Muli Peleg. And what we have in mind is that I'm going to introduce Dr. Peleg, and then he's going to give us a brief presentation, and then I'll pepper him with a couple of questions perhaps, and then we'll open it up for a conversation with everybody that's online. So let me begin by setting the context here. Here at the University of Cincinnati, as it happens this semester, I'm teaching a course on contemporary Israeli society, and some of the students are here. And we are familiar with Dr. Peleg's work because we've read it. We are also familiar with Oranim College because we've had this wonderful experience this past semester of meeting with Oranim College students on 4 occasions to share ideas and learning and get to know each other. And that effort has been championed by another colleague that's here with us today, Dr. Rachel Ravid, excuse me, and also another colleague, Lori Abramson. So it's great to have everybody together. The title of Dr. Peleg's talk today is Challenges Facing Peace Building in Israel, the Case of the Hilltop Youth in the Occupied West Bank. Let me just introduce him here. He is the director of the International School at Oranim College and a member of the board of directors of Hillel Israel for the advancement of Jewish peoplehood among Israeli students. Dr. Peleg is a political sociologist trained in the fields of comparative politics and international relations. His area of expertise are peace building and reconciliation, social sustainability, justice and human rights, and conflict resolution. His research focuses on intercultural and interfaith dialogue in deeply divided communities. He previously taught at Fordham University's Peace and Justice Studies program and at the Rutgers University Business School. From 2010 to 2013, he was a visiting faculty member at Columbia University's Negotiation and Conflict Resolution program. And he's the author of numerous articles, as well as some very interesting and important books. The books that I want to mention just now are titled Spreading the Wrath of God, From Gush Emunim to Rabin Square, Zealotry and Vengeance, Quest of a Religious Identity Group, If Words Could Kill, The Failure of Public Discourse in Israel, Fighting Terrorism in the Liberal State, and Intercultural and Interfaith Dialogue for Peace. Now, he's going to be speaking to us today on the topic of the Hilltop Youth in the Occupied West Bank. And I want to mention that he recently published a chapter in a book titled Finding Meaning that was published by Oxford University Press just this year. And the title of the chapter is similar to the title of today's talk. And I will be very glad to share that with anybody that wants to receive a copy of it. You just let me know and we'll shoot it out to you after today's session. So without further ado, welcome Dr. Peleg, and thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to studying with you.
Thank you, Mark. A pleasure and honor to be here with you. And I'm going to take the screen now. All right. Everybody seeing this? Okay. Here it is. Okay. So that's the picture, which says a lot. And the writing on the t-shirt, by the way, says, "Let Jews win." So not to be mistaken with other extremists in other places in the world. This says a lot as the identity of those in the picture is very clear. They're not trying to hide anything. And they cover their faces just for the pose. But They are not timid or shy about who they are and what they want. So I want to start with presenting the case study, because I don't know the extent of your familiarity with the Hilltop Youth. I'm going to start with presenting them, and then in the second half, I will try to harness their case within a theoretical framework, which is relevant and pertains to other such organizations of activism in various places in the world. So to start with, these are what I see as the main basic features of this movement. And they are also are presented in an elaborate way in the article. And I want to go through each one of them in a thorough way. Started with the first one, number one, motivation and inspiration for action. So, as I said, am I heard clearly to everyone? Good. So my current work explores the motivations and incentives that attract young activists to extremist ideologies, rebellious lifestyles, and violent behavior. In the particular example of the Hilltop Youth, their quest is bolstered by fear of losing the holy lands of their forefathers and any future peace process with the Palestinians, and by what they perceive as the impotence of the Israeli authorities to curtail Palestinian violence against them. They challenge the ability and the sincerity of the Zionist state. This is a term that they constantly use, which is basically secular, modern, and westernized, to ever implement their vision of a Jewish theocratic kingdom. Now, the media has termed them the Hilltop Youth, not themselves, referring to their geographical locale, the desolate hills and knolls of Judea and Samaria, in which they reside in makeshift communities and in a total defiance and disregard for the Israeli law or the indigenous Palestinians. Although their extremism and militancy emerge from various political, historical, cultural, and religious sources, I want to stress here the socio-psychological pursuit for meaning, sense of belonging, and sense of purpose in a precarious age of tumult and uncertainty. I think that's the main feature that we have to pay attention to here. These unruly youngsters are motivated by an acute feeling of depravity and estrangement, which urges them to create a new collective identity and a new social grouping. Now, with regard to this distinction that you see here, Israeli nationalism and Jewish nationalism, I think it's a critical one. And to understand this better, we have to go to the past or the roots of this movement. Factions of religious Zionism's younger generation perceive themselves as the victims or dupes of the Zionist states. 70 years of independence and 120 years of Zionism have not mitigated the inherent tension regarding the nature of the state and its mission. Now, instead of resolution, the rift deepens. The profound incongruity between religious and secular visions of redemptions became intolerable to generate two competing images of Zionism: Israeli nationalism and Jewish nationalism, which the Hilltop Youth belong to the latter. Third point, sense of alienation and betrayal. Each one stems from the previous ones. The initial grievance of religious Zionism emerged from a sense of deception. They relinquished Orthodox Judaism, which rejected Zionism as interference with God planning, in favor of activism they thought would precipitate redemption. But to their dismay and anger, the biggest realization of the venture they embarked on, the inception of the Jewish state, was snatched out of their hands by non-believers. While the old generation of religious Zionists seems acquiescent, their mostly Sabre, that's Israeli-born, offsprings felt betrayed and anxious to change their predicament. This sense of alienation peaked with the jubilation of the 1967 war, and the ensuing disillusionment of the 1973 war. Gush Emunim, the bulk of the faithful, which was formed in 1974, the ideological precursor of the Hilltop Youth, was born as the settlers movement, defying and daring the Israeli government with every move. Close-knitted, secretive group, that's a very important feature or characteristic of the case study at hand. The alienation was augmented by a camaraderie of the affinity of the unprivileged, their words, that garners them into consolidated and self-sustained subsystems, which makes it very difficult for the likes of the Shin Bet, the intelligence service or the police forces to infiltrate them. They unveil primordial and unencumbered ties, which are strategically utilized against the state's former judicial systems, congregating around organic ancient symbols. Their tenacity and zeals are cultivated towards establishing an alternative social political order. Again, their words. Explosive potential in a fragmented society. We have to pay attention to this closely. These groups have a potential explosive influence on the delicate social fabric of a deeply divided and fragmented societies such as Israel. They can ignite and magnify every occurring disagreement into a quandary that might set the polemical Israeli society into a spin. The more the state loses its grip over such dissidents, the more their fervor and eagerness to break free of the state's patronage surges. And we have been witnesses to this kind of dynamics only in recent days. The enemy is the Zionist state. When I heard some of them expressing this idea, I had shivers, but I stayed with my poker face scholar's demeanor. The passage of time transformed the Gush Emunim, the Black of the Faithful, from mavericks to establishment functionaries. The Hilltop Youth felt betrayed by them. In their perception, the Bloc's veterans became part of the problem. The major problem now, in their eyes, is not the Palestinians, not the peace camp, and not the Labor Party, but the Zionist state itself. What the Hilltop Youth envision is a theocratic polity, a renewed kingdom of David in Judea and Samaria, not less. This is their sense of purpose. This is their reason of being. Everything that stands in the way of this aspiration, including the Israeli government, the Israeli army, the Israeli police, and the Israeli courts, is an enemy. The character of the group. They number several dozens, true believers, who reside in impoverished dwellings in the deserted hills of the West Bank. They challenge the authority and rules of the state and perceive the confrontation with the authorities as part of the cosmic struggle between good and evil. It is also a part, they believe, of the inevitable pangs of the Messiah experience, harbingering his imminent arrival. The rebellious spirit of the Bloc of the Faithful was conferred to the Hilltop Youth, but they expanded it beyond militant political opposition to an all-out rejection of the system. And lastly, in that part, their reclusive state of being is akin in their eyes to the living style of the biblical prophets or the tribes of Israel when they first inherited the land. For these young extremists, ages range from 13 to 23, the oldest. This is an initiation ceremony, coming of age, becoming part of the army of the Redeemers. This is a tremendous spiritual and self-transcendent undertaking in which they are unified with God and nature on the top of those barren hills. They take pride in their naturalist, nativist, and self-sufficient existence, nourishing and cherishing a pristine, almost primordial, dare I say romantic persistence. But they are far from being a bunch of innocent peaceniks. their political agenda, galvanized by messianic militancy, is set for an ultimate collision course with the Israeli government. Now, I want, as I said, to harness this into a theoretical framework. And I want to rely on Manny Mildarsky, who was my next door neighbor in the Rutgers faculty lounge. And he wrote in 2011 an illuminating book about the origins of extremism. And I think this was really a path-breaking concept or framework that he laid down for us. And for him, political extremism of any kind has really three elements to it. And these are the elements that I want to go through them. And they are important and critical to understand the Hilltop Youth. The contraction of authority space is really the authority space that is required by any authority to maintain its influence over constituencies. And in their eyes, their space is limited by both the Zionist state and the Palestinians, which really generates an incredible amount of fear and mistrust in the system. Ephemeral gain, as it says, is a short-lived ascendancy or control that was followed by a loss or a threat of loss. It includes fear of reservation to a former state of submission, perception of injustice and angst, and sense of humiliation or disappointment, which fits right in with this 1967 peak and what they saw as divine intervention that was later, 7 years later, was eclipsed by the Yom Kippur War and the beginning of the end or of the peace process with the Palestinians, first with Egypt and then with the Palestinians. And lastly, mortality salience, the acute feeling and heightened awareness that of one's mortality. So we have those three elements of fear, disappointment, and urgency that really pushes them into radical activism. And these elements, as theoretical elements, are very important to adhere to when you try to understand their tenacity and their persistence in what they do. So again, I want to bring our two protagonists, religion and violence, together because their association is not to be taken for granted, because here we start with the puzzle. How can religion, the definitive perception of the good, be so deeply entangled with violence? And this puzzle really pushed me into further inquiry. And I came up with those 3 points to regard and consider. The religion-violence nexus is not direct. It is mediated by politics. The question then is, how does politics intervene to create association between faith and violence? Again, not something to be taken for granted. Religion is the constant tension between order and disorder, or a conflict between deeper and superficial reality. This is taken by my old friend, Mark Juergensmeyer from University of California, Santa Barbara, in a wonderful book he wrote in 1993 called The New Cold War. This is a setting for a meeting of religion and violence. This initial association is radicalized by 2 opposing variants: politicization of religion, and from the other side, the mirror image of it, religionization of politics. I want to understand, I want to explain further those 2 concepts. Politicization of religion is basically about religious protagonists playing the political arena, seeking political goals. They utilize religious terminology and symbols to mobilize supporters. They exploit messianic visions and images of imminent redemption to inspire and stimulate their followers. This was the case with the bulk of the faithful. This is the case with the Hilltop Youth. The other direction, religionization of politics, is the inverted relationships. Protagonists exploit politics to advance religious goals. Missionary leaders, avid proselytes, and campaigning shamans find the political arena propitious to recruit masses to religious crusades and holy struggles. Both types of association empower activists to ensure loyalty, commitment, and willingness to sacrifice to the same extent, which makes them very, very dangerous to the system. Here is a list of characteristics that typify religious extremism anywhere in the world. The eternal cosmic struggle between good and evil. The present is a decisive moment for this great cosmic war to tip the scales one way or another, so that a small intervention of dedicated humans could make all the difference in the world. That explains their commitment, unwavering commitment to the goal. A tendency, and this happens many times in Israel, a tendency to associate mundane socio-political conflicts and disagreements with the eternal conflict struggle. So it always amplifies and magnifies to something that rattled the governments. And here is an important thing: personal contribution to facilitate the advent of redemption. It's up to you, Yigal Amir, or people like him, to make something, to get up of your living room and do something that will bring about the victory of the righteous. You will be counted with the righteous and blessed. This is a very strong, insurmountable almost motivation for these people to do what they do. Violent action in the name of the cause liberates the soul and exonerates your previous sins. And lastly, violent act is the initiation ceremony and the membership card to the movement, worthy of your peers. Now, lastly, before we open this, I want to present a model which I found very useful and very invigorating for me. And this is a theoretical model that explains how devout religious people can avail themselves, not many, by the way, we're not talking about a whole lot, but we're talking about quality here, so to speak, not quantity, avail themselves to active violence and terrorism. This is what the literature calls the extremist mindset. It is a juxtaposition of two scholars, Carl Schmitt, a German political scientist, and René Girard, a French sociologist or a scholar of comparative religions, both equally fascinated by the religion-politics nexus. And I got the inspiration for this from my friend and colleague Byron Bland from Stanford University. We said about this idea and we discussed it various times. And I think it's fascinating, but it's originally his. So what we're talking about here is Schmidt's combination, and he wrote about it in many of his books, the binary classifications of friends and enemies. These are poles of a political spectrum which represents varying degrees of association and dissociation. The enemy is the ultimate dissociation, while the most trustworthy association is with friends. René Girard approached it from the religion side of the equation, stemming from the Durkheim analysis of the sacred and the profane, constructs an original religiously based binary observation of holy and evil. Religion was born to protect the community from harm. Now, it is a combination of labeling the other as enemies, the political, and evils, the religious, that empowers the extremist and authorizes atrocious violence in the name of redemption. And this is what we get when we juxtapose those two dimensions. We get four tables, which are fascinating and I think illuminating the group that we are discussing today. So in the vertical side, the religious, the holy and the evil. And on the horizontal side, the political friends and enemies. And notice the meeting between evil and enemies. This is the holy war. This is the crusade or the jihad or the hilltop youth. This is where they are. Politically classified enemies who are also religiously evil that marry the holy war against them. An agreement or coordination between the political leadership and the religious leadership, where these two realms of power are one and the same, justified violence against evil enemies is facilitated and expedited. This is what we have on our hands here, folks. And this is the state of affairs that the Israeli government, with all its frailties, needs to analyze, understand, and act against. So in this optimistic note, I will open the floor, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Muli. I wonder if maybe you want to minimize that screen now.
Sure. Yeah, yes.
I'm going to encourage everybody to feel free to put questions in the chat. I have a couple of questions to kind of kick things off, and then I will also call on some folks here to ask their questions publicly, or we'll try to, loop back to them in the chat, however it's most productive. So thank you for that illuminating presentation, Muli. That's really so generative and so thought-provoking. One question I have for you as a way to kind of help us build a bridge between your presentation and our understanding. In your article, you speak about the idea that the religious Zionist establishment is undergoing a messianic dilemma, and that you already spoke about Gush Emunim, the block of the faithful, which comes out of the era of the Yom Kippur or October 1973 war, and the way that that opens the door to kind of messianic assumptions and fantasies. Can you help us kind of connect the dots here between that period and our own period now? How is it that this development or this phenomenon has led to what you call a messianic dilemma for the religious Zionist establishment?
Well, I'll try to explain this because it's complicated and it's a multifarious phenomenon. But, Herzl, when he started his idea of Jews returning to their homeland, the national Jewish idea of Zionism, the most difficult population for him to approach and convince was the religious population, because for them, Zionism was considered a secular idea, an intervention in the divine move, divine vision, which takes a long time. So to interfere with the divine planning was a sin. But nevertheless, he didn't want to give up on them because of their numbers and because some of his friends were also religious. So he didn't want to give up on them altogether. And then when he approached them, he caused a schism within that camp, because some of them were more practical than others. And many of them just rejected Zionism flatly. And many of them, died in the Holocaust because they didn't believe in this idea. Those who jump on the Zionism wagon earlier on saved themselves and their families. So this dilemma, this tension between whether we precipitate the redemption or just wait for God, as our rabbis told us, continued through 1948, the inception of the state, and so forth. Now, one of the religious leaders that brought a compromise to this dilemma was Rabbi Kook, the senior Rabbi Kook, that said that Zionism and the Israeli state goes well together with the vision of the redemption, because this is the intention of God. Zionism would not have started without the direction of God. Herzl didn't know it, Rabbi Kook said, but he was directed and inspired by God. This tension remained, and it was taken into extremes by the groups that thought that once the Israeli state began its way, it started to look more and more similar to other nations. And they took pride in Israel being a different nation, a nation of the Jews. So it should be a Jewish state, and not only a state for the Jews. A Jewish state is a totally different term than a state of the Jews, because the emphasis here is in Jewish. Everything in the state should be Jewish. That's not the case. That's not the case even today. And they felt more and more remote, especially after the '67 war, which was for them a sign that the Messiah is about to arrive and they should be more active to prepare the soil for it. So the messianic dilemma is really, are we part of the Israeli state with all it represents, secularism, westernizing, modernity, and we are a part of this game, or we wait outside, do what we do to prepare the arrival of the Messiah, even if we are on a collision course with the Israeli state, especially the Israeli courts, how to proceed with that. Should we play, or should we be a player within the system, or will play outside the system? The Gush Emunim started as outsiders, as mavericks, and bit by bit they were drawn into the system. They became a political party. They got some positions in government, and basically they were co-opted as those who stayed out thought. Now the Hilltop Youth said, this is not going to happen to us, and we're going to fight from the outside. For us, there is no dilemma. We are waiting for the Messiah, and the Israeli state is an obstacle on the road to this vision.
Thank you. So that leads to my next observation from your article. The idea that the state is an obstacle, you suggest, is present in other societies as well in our time. And you point to the Klan and the Red Brigades and the Taliban and the alt-right as similar kinds of developments outside of Israel, in other parts of the world, where there is some kind of perceived sense of disenfranchisement and of being an antagonist to the state, that the state stands in the way of some other vision of society. Can you say a little more about those parallels? Are you suggesting that there's some kind of radicalization afoot more broadly around the globe? And in what way does the question of the Hilltop Youth, figure into that, do you think?
Look, it's an excellent question. I'll try to match this with a good answer. Extremism is extremism. And let me take you back to 1970 and an excellent book by Seymour Lipset and Earl Rabb. And they were the first to really find what the main characteristics of extremism are. 5 elements that they brought to bear. And one of them was monism. The second one was simplism. And there were also conspiracy theory and moralism. And I think they still stand. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about left-wing extremism, right-wing extremism. It's not a line, it's a circle. And the more extremist you become, you meet the extremist on the other side. Mussolini was a very radical leftist. He even was the editor of the Il Popolo, the journal of the Communist Party in Italy. And then the First World War made him into a right-wing extremist in a matter of 2 months. And it was very easy for him to move. So you saw the picture, the photo that I presented in the beginning of my presentation. And if I hadn't told you about the writing on their t-shirts, you would have thought that these are Hamas kids. So the way they think, extremism, more than a political movement, is a mindset. And I think it's totally similar. The way you think, first of all, monism, that there is only one truth and you possess it. And if you have 100% of the truth, everybody else who doesn't think like you arithmetically, they have 0% of the truth. So there's no point in understanding them, empathy, discussing with them, negotiation, forget about that. They are an obstacle to whatever vision you have. And the only way to go about it is removing them. Now, there's no problem to extremists with violence. On the other hand, not on the other hand, but on the contrary, virility is, again, it's an initiation sign, not for the soft-hearted to become an extremist. One of the way you prove your loyalty, your commitment, your readiness to sacrifice is to act violently, because a change is imminent, and a change is not reforms, not gradual, not pieces of change, but dramatic, drastic, and quick change. And the way to do that is by violence. Now, take every extremist movement in the world today. They will fit this box. And you can check all the boxes, and they will fit. Again, ideology, it doesn't matter. Membership doesn't matter. The political arena doesn't matter. It's a mindset, and they can all form one single political party because they are all a threat to the system wherever they are.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open things up now for other questions and comments and observations. Let me first ask if there are members of the student audience here that have some questions to pose. Well, I'll keep an eye on the chat and on the you know, the emojis or whatever they're called that give me a sense of who's ready to ask a question. I'll encourage you to speak up when you're ready. I'll just open it up more broadly then to anybody that has a question or a comment. And just remember to unmute yourself, and please introduce yourself when you do ask your question. Go ahead, Steve.
Dr. Peleg, thank you for your presentation. That was absolutely fascinating. I, you know, trying to understand this, I'm coming through my own lens and my own historical context, and thinking about extremism in the United States. And it's so much of what you said makes sense to me in terms of how these things, these phenomena kind of combine to blind and exterminate other people, their views and the way they think. And have you given much thought to what that looks like? And you've had quite a bit of experience in the States, what that looks like here. What are some of your initial thoughts in comparing the two phenomenon in the cultures?
Well, I don't see any peculiar features to American extremism. I do want to point out an important distinction, I think, between extremism and radicalism. They are not identical. You know, let's start with the etymology of the word. Extremos, you know, the farthest away point on a spectrum. The two soldiers on the phalanx, the Roman basic military structure, the two faraway soldiers were called extremos. So to be extreme is really to be on the most polar position on a spectrum. Radicalism comes from the Latin word radux, which is root. So I would say that every extremist is by nature a radical, but not every radical is by nature an extremist. What do I mean by that? A radical can be someone who explores the situation and tries to find out what's wrong with the system and digs in. And if he sees that everything is okay and it was just an impression, it would cover up the tunnel and remain to normalcy. If he sees that half of it is rotten, he would change, or they would change half of it. And if everything is rotten, they would change everything. Now, if to continue this line of thinking, I would say that Martin Luther King was a radical, but definitely not an extremist. Because extremism, after the exploration, and many times without an exploration, which is the most dangerous situation, trying to become extremist and ruin the system without really digging into this and find out what's wrong. So if I may make an observation, which is just at the top of my head, between, for example, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, I would say again that there are the various degrees within extremism and within radicalism, but we relate to the conclusions and the plan of each of these personalities. With the former wanted to be a part of the American society and relying on the Constitution, and the latter wants to be, you know, a different unit, a different entity. I think once he even says that give us our own state in Nevada or Utah. So you can see here two different approaches, which I think sustains the distinction between radicalism and extremism. But if you take, you know, the KKK or the Symbionese Liberation Army with Patty Hearst, and you try to find out the characteristics, and you juxtapose it, or you put it within the Lipset and Rab formulation, or some of the models that I use, you see, I think, a sound fit there. Thank you, Steve.
Muli, can I ask a question?
No.
I'm stunned by you know my views about the extremists in the West Bank, and who are finding their way into the main, you know, into Israel as well, to for example, the extremists in the Knesset and what they did today with the walk of the flags, with the flags in Jerusalem.
Rachel, I'm not sure everybody knows about this. So if you're going to go into this, maybe you should, a couple of lines.
Just to say that in the Israeli parliament, we have extremists that are very racist, and were brought in as a political survival move by our ex-Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But the question is, how do we deal with these extremists? Because I'm very frustrated. And you said we should we should put a limit, or not have them, that they're really, there's no, what I understand is that there's not much we can do, or I don't know, but it's a challenge, it's an obstacle that we need to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was Aristotle that wrote about the paradox of democracy. Now, what is the paradox of democracy? You know, paradox, basically from Greek, beyond logic, paradoxa. And every paradox has an inherent contradiction within it. And what is the contradiction here? What happens if a party or a movement that is abrasively and clearly against democracy and declares that is going to ruin democracy wants to participate in the election? What happens then? Can you eliminate them? Can you, prevent them from running? If you do that, you yourself harm the democracy. You undermine the democracy. So there is this idea of defensive democracy. But who decides? And to what extent? This is the dilemma. This is the paradox of democracy. And it happened in Israel in 1984 when the Kach political party of Rabbi Kahana, which was flagrantly racist. And they said so. Kahana himself, time and again said that if he's going to have the reins of power, he's going to dismantle Israeli democracy. And the same with Hitler. Hitler participated, the Nazi party participated. They were elected to power, although there were all kinds of twisted there. But when they ran, they announced that once they are going to be in power, they're going to close down the Weimar Republic system, the democratic system, and they did. They followed their promise to the letter. But who is to decide who is going to be out, who's going to be in, when, what are the signs? If you eliminate one party, tomorrow you're going to eliminate another party, perhaps your party. But this is a very delicate question. Now, the people that you mentioned, and we have at least 2 or 3 well-known extremists in the Knesset today, they enter there because they intend to bring down the Israeli democracy if they have enough power. Absolutely. They don't hide this. They don't conceal this. But what do? Listen, you can just say simply that if your society is 80% full of fascists, move elsewhere. You know, what can you do? This is what the people want. This is one of the, I would say, the chances, the challenges, the weakness, the strengths of democracy. Let the people say what they want. If your society wants extremism or they want racists to rule them, move to another neighborhood. I don't think it's going to happen in Israel, though.
Oh,
Can I put a twist on this? Okay, this is very interesting
Sure.
because of course you're talking about what's happening internally in the Israeli parliament and about the kind of polarized landscape of the Israeli political scene and the fragility of the current governing coalition, which is trying to straddle all of this. And previously, of course, you were giving us a very rich profile of the Hilltop Youth as a case study in extremism. You did mention the Hamas youth as well, and some other kinds of parallels in other parts of the globe. So I'm wondering, in what way do extremists actually form some kind of loose coalition and alliance from different wings of the political spectrum, and in some kind of unintentional way aid each other? In other words, you have extremism in Israel proper, you have extremists in Palestine as well. How do those extremist groups wind up aiding each other and impeding, or in some ways undermining or detracting from the efforts of more moderate groups that are seeking some kind of reconciliation and some kind of idea of a shared society, whatever that might be?
Well, let me take you back to Louis Kozer, I think in 1956 or 57, Functions of Social Conflict, the masterpiece. He coined the term alliance of antagonists.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need to have a formal alliance because these people read each other. They cannot allow themselves to have a direct, overt alliance or association, but they think alike and they know what to expect. And they know that the political atmosphere in Israel at times can be toxic and very, very sensitive. So they wait for something to happen, but they have already an arsenal of reactions, and they're just waiting to go with it. The events of last May in Israel really demonstrated how extremists on both sides are ready at the sign to be activated. Everybody knew what's going to happen. Everybody knew it. It was predicated, it was anticipated by everyone. First, extremists on one side went to the streets, and then inviting, so to speak, the extremists on the other side to come over to the same arena and collide. Both of them were less interested in their immediate foes and more interested in the reaction or lack of the authorities, because they wanted to demonstrate the weakness of the government on both sides. The Hamas extremists wanted to show Abu Mazen and his inability to curtail them, and Ben Gvir and Israeli extremists or Jewish extremists on the other side wanted to humiliate the Israeli government, especially the new government, which really holds on to a thread here, because they have both right wing and left wing composing it. So you can see by the way they work, they don't have to coordinate, because they know where the other is going to be and when. They know the repertoire of each side. So they play right into the hand of the other.
Mhm.
It's a tacit collaboration, which works, unfortunately, very well every time. Bethany wants
Bethany,
to say
please,
something.
please go ahead.
There we go. I have a quick question. So as far as within the government, you say there are some who their intentions are to tear down the democratic institution if possible. Is there, just kind of in connection with things that have happened here in America, like currently they're trying to, I think they're trying to use the, I can't remember what the act name is, but from the Civil War, where if you try to lead an insurrection, or if you try and overthrow the government, then you can no longer be represented in the government. Do you guys have anything set up that way?
But just a minor correction: the zealots, the current zealots of the Israeli politic arena, are not in the government, but they're in the parliament. They are in the opposition. However, you know, this is a very fragile and precarious system. And tomorrow, if the previous prime minister is going to be back on his throne, for a lack of a better word, he would need them to compose the coalition. And then this scenario is going to be very, very real. I don't think we have something similar to this, but perhaps you should have. But the ins and outs of the Israeli political system are fascinating, especially for someone like me who is a political scientist with expertise in extremism. I have a lot of material, unfortunately, as an Israeli citizen.
I think a kind of natural extension of Bethany's question is, in what way or to what degree, although I'm not asking you for a precise measurement, do you think that the Hilltop Youth phenomenon represents a tipping point or a serious kind of threat to the political balance of things in Israel?
I think it's a very severe threat, because these guys are not just camping there. Every day we hear about violent attacks on Palestinians, Palestinian farmers. They burn fields and trees. They damage cars. They throw stones at Palestinian residents, and almost with impunity. And they feel that they rule the land, because the Israeli authorities are very hesitant in going there. As I said in my presentation, very close-knit. I mean, usually you try to infiltrate with intelligence. It's very difficult to do that. Mm-hmm. And they cause damage every day in the field, on the ground. Now, the danger is not because of the amount of violence, but because of the repercussions that it might have on the Israeli government. The Israeli government is so fragile. Right now it's 60-60. They need one more person to move over to the opposition to bring it down. Now, if there is a tension, some kind of escalation that starts from some kind of a violent act, you never know what's going to happen, and very quickly, very rapidly, things can escalate. See how things escalate nowadays. Started in the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, and Jordan is in, and the Emirates are in, and Egypt and Turkey and the whole lot. Mm-hmm. So just imagine if something goes wrong, if the violence really escalates in one of those hills, you can never guess what the repercussions might be. So I think this is a grave danger to the Israeli stability.
Thank you.
Rachel, maybe the cat has a question.
I think one question that's probably on everybody's mind, Muli, listening to you, and you're such a keen observer of all of these developments, is do you see hope anywhere? Is there a glimmer of possibility that produces in you some kind of reasoned but optimistic kind of hope for the future?
Well, Mark, I returned to Israel a year and a half ago after 10 years in the States. You cannot do such a move without optimism. Cautious optimism, but yes, I am a great believer in the human spirit. And what we're trying to do now, and Rachel knows that, in the Oranim International School, is to also deal with intercultural and interfaith dialogue. I find it very difficult to understand or to see eye to eye with extremism. But I think that people who are happy and content cannot be extremists. You need a profound sense of unhappiness, of disillusionment, in order to be pushed. Yes, that's the verb I'm going to use. In order to be pushed into the arms of extremism. And I think on these levels of discontent and dismay, dialogue can help. Dialogue can help, because I think this discontent is a perceived one. It's in the eye of the beholder. And if you engage with people like that and try to mitigate their sufferings or their impression of reality, I think there's a way. I think there's a hope. And I have an experience from 10 years, 20 years ago, talking to activists of Gush, the old generation of the Hilltop Youth. It really changed their way. They see things differently now, not because of me, but because people from my camp, so to speak, engaged them and related to them as, on equal footing, not derogating them or condescending them, oh, you extremists, you evil ones, but trying to understand their fears, their deprivation. And I think this talk, which is not a touch and go effort, it's an ongoing, it's frustrating at times, many times, but trying to understand where they're coming from might really affect the way or the direction they are heading towards. So I'm optimistic, cautiously so, as I say.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments for today? Well, as it happens, the class hour is just coming to a close, so that's perfectly timed. Again, Muli, I want to thank you on behalf of all of us for this really enlightening and thought-provoking presentation, and for letting us in on some of your most current work and research, and also for taking time to share your evening with the University of Cincinnati community and our friends who are spread far and wide. All right, so I will bring things to a close, and it was great to see everybody. And if anybody would like to receive a copy of the article that is kind of in the background here for today's conversation, I'm happy to send it to you via email. Just let me know. Okay? All right, very good. Well, everybody that's celebrating the holidays, happy holidays. Stay well, enjoy the start of the spring. Ciao.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.